It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! And if I sounded a little scared during that singing, it's because I have Binky with me. And Binky tends to draw blood. But Binky is here because somebody sent me a direct message on Twitter saying their cat, George, is sick. He stopped eating and he really likes Binky videos. Apparently meows at Binky when he watches the videos. And so I thought I'd have Binky here to say, get well, George. Sway Binky. Yay. Yeah. Binky. And we have been through that situation of cats not eating. We had a few cats have a condition called fatty liver, which they stop eating. And so they lose a bunch of weight fast. Their liver can't process it. And then they don't want to start eating again because they feel sick. And so what we had to do is get a whole bunch of different kinds of cat food and cycle them. And I found the ones with the gravy bits, the stuff with just the clear fluid. It's almost like giving people clear fluids. I found they were more likely to eat that, and at least that gave them some nutrition and it stabilized the weight loss. But the problem was they'd eat one type of food, feel sick, associated with the food, stop eating it. So we had to keep switching brands of food, and eventually our old cat Bashful recovered, and we've used that trick ever since. So George's person, that's if you got to get him eating again. There are foods out there that stimulate the appetite. There are medications they can give them to stimulate the appetite, but that's the trick that I found the best. Why are you trying to eat my hair?
Hey, can I throw in some suggestions as well?
What? This is my husband.
We had to really keep pushing the food in front of his face and also put some on the nose.
Okay, I don't know if you guys heard that, but my husband said that we had to keep pushing the food in front of Bashful's face and also put some on the nose so he'll lick it off. But anyway, and that's it for Binky. Okay, so part 2 of Feedback Friday, I have put the mic closer and put in a headphone. Binky would have ripped that out and kicked this over potentially. So, and that rustling you hear in the background is Binky ripping apart a plastic bag. I had to take notes because, wow, the Cultivation Theory video from Gamer's Guide to Feminism, the second last Gamer's Guide to Feminism, got a lot of really pointed response. People expecting a lot of technical stuff that, and I take this as a compliment. I take this as a compliment that people are enjoying this series and feel like it is very informative. But some people are expecting an awful lot out of a 17-minute video. One of the things that multiple people, which is why I decided to focus on it and make notes, commented on was that I didn't talk about first order and second order cultivated effects. The thing is, I did. I just didn't call them first order and second order effects because one of the big challenges in this series is that I'm trying to keep things simple so that people can really thoroughly understand the things relevant to gaming. And so I'm trying not to go too far into the weeds with a whole bunch of stuff that, isn't really on topic. And so there was a lot more about the details about cultivation theory in the original draft of the video that I ended up cutting. Both, I took a chunk out at the script phase and then I cut it again when I was editing because I was getting bored watching it. I was just like, no, I'm falling asleep. Somebody watching this just out of sort of infotainment value is not going to stick through this to get to the critical part of the thesis at the end. Binky keeps looking over here and making me think somebody's showing up. So there, I did make reference to first order and second order effects. Now, what are those? First order effects are cultivated general beliefs about the world. So I talked about that with mean world syndrome. So that is a first order effect. Yes, I did cover that. Second order effects are specific attitudes. Second order effects are where cultivation theory gets really messy. But we did talk about that because all those additional studies I talked about the perpetuation of traditionalist attitudes towards women in Japan dealt with second order effects. That study that dealt with very specific, boys were less had less empathy towards female victims of assault. That is a straight up second order effect. That is not a wide view of the world type thing. So first order and second order effects were both involved, but I didn't want to get into terms because it gets so messy. By the way, yes, there is a playlist. A couple people asked. I will add this video to the playlist. Oh, sorry, I will link to the playlist and add the last one so you can get the whole series. So, moving on. There was a super angry commenter who claimed I knew nothing about feminism and wasn't a real feminist, and she didn't just attack me, she started arguing with other commenters. And you guys may have seen that I told her, cut it out or I'm gonna kick you for being a troll, and then she swore at me again, but she seemed to stop. If she didn't stop, please let me know. There were a lot of comments on that video, but even though it, it hasn't shot up yet, but the weekend hasn't happened yet. The last video, it went boom on the weekend. But if it's not stopping, can someone please let me know? Because that was not okay behavior, and I want to explain why. It's one thing to disagree. It's a different thing to start saying, you're an idiot. And that was the thing. I'm like, no, not okay. The way to back away from that. Like, that confrontational attitude is not dialogue. That's an argument. And this is precisely what we don't need in this discussion. And this is why we dealt with, earlier in the series, some of you may have missed it, what I call the dwark side. The sort of playing to the stereotype of the angry feminist faction among, radicals sort of thing. I called it, after Andrea Dworkin, I called it the dwark side, and people started calling it Dworksiders and all this stuff. And obviously Andrea Dworkin didn't invent a lot of those attitudes, but she seemed to just check every box, and so she became the face of that movement. But the reason I sort of stuck a pin in that one is because that faction destroys dialogue even within feminist thought, feminist discussions, feminist conferences. They're people who demand inclusion and then shut down discussion because you can't disagree with them, or they claim it's a personal attack. They are very angry. There's a lot of emotion. And one of the first things they teach you about intentional dialogue and all that stuff is you have to slow things down and you have to keep the emotion out of it, because screaming and yelling and, big emotional, I don't even know what the word is. I want to be careful what I say here because people aren't making it up. Some of these people are legit traumatized, but that's fine for a protest. But when you're trying to have a even keel discussion with people and create something productive out of it, you can't do that there. There's a time and a place for catharsis. Catharsis, there's the word I'm looking for. And I know people are like, well, you're silencing me and all that stuff. If you're going to continue to consume content on this channel, you now have been warned, I don't play those games. We have a particular way we do things here because it works. And these shut down levers, these call outs, these so-called punching up comments, we don't do that here. We don't treat the other commenters like people on the other side of a protest line. We treat them like people that you are looking in the face and you are having a conversation with, even though it's the internet. This is the stuff we're trying to foster here. And I'm telling people this because people don't have any excuse to complain if you don't follow those wishes and get your comment privileges revoked as a result. Because this is the reason we can keep comments open, and keeping comments open is extremely important to me. I'm going to use the language that some people understand. This is a safe space. All right, moving on. And people make fun of my reactions like that, and people are like, oh, it's mugging and it's too big and everything like that. Guys, this is me, and if you don't like my personality, find other content. I'm getting a little sick of people criticizing my natural way of responding to things. If you don't like it, don't look. And there are people who are going to go, you're alienating potential viewers. Yeah, Yeah, I am. Because my goal in this is to actually give people a place to learn and a place to talk. And I am willing to sacrifice raw numbers. Because, yes, negativity does draw numbers on YouTube. But I'm willing to sacrifice that to give people a place where they can actually ask questions that may get them shouted down other places. And this is a segue to the next thing I want to talk about. The question was basically, does anyone care about the pain of men? And of course, societally, not as much as we probably should. And this actually is tied into feminism as a whole, because the side effect, and I'm not even prepared to call it a side effect at this point, it's a more subtle effect that historically, while women were denied fairly specific rights, and it was fairly easy to, how do I put this? Fairly easy to identify how women were harmed by gendered assumptions about what men should be and what women should be. The stuff that affected men negatively was more subtle, but we're seeing it more and more and more in modern culture as sort of we get closer to, I'll call it gender equilibrium. The fact that business and family are so artificially separated is a real problem in the working world, because people are expected to work like 80 hours a week and be a fully engaged parent. It's just not possible. You know, game developers in the middle of the crunch, they don't see their families for weeks, sometimes months. That's ridiculous, but that's the modern business world. And this is wrong. And this is because business has been structured on this sacrificial, hyper-masculine paradigm that they claim it's about productivity, but there has been no indication that people who work 80 hours a week are more productive than people who work 40 hours a week. In fact, they've seen a drop in productivity. There's a reason, you know, a work week is supposed to be 40 hours. I mean, think of that. The people, especially in this industry, they're working 2 work weeks every week. That isn't sustainable. You get sick. Things start breaking, both mentally and physically. It's not okay, but this is the expectations. And so this gets into this whole realm of what is called benevolent sexism. And I say what is called because I use the term begrudgingly. I don't think it's benevolent at all. And one person actually complained about the longitudinal study. Oh my God, did you see what was in that study? Like, that's what I heard through the internet. It's like, oh my God. Because whenever somebody starts with, oh my God, or what is wrong with you, I immediately kick into that like mean girl place. Like, oh my God. Like, I just completely dismiss any comment as serious that starts with that sort of hissy fit explosion. And it's because they were saying the study was garbage for precisely the reasons I liked it, is that it's measuring the more subtle, I would say insidious sexism. Things like men should take care of the women in their families. And people are like, well, of course. But when you think about it, the statement should actually be, people should take care of the people in their families. There are abuse paradigms where people, men and women alike, take advantage of that social conditioning that men are supposed to be the providers. And they use that to manipulate, coerce, and abuse men. And this is a very serious thing, and it's something we're going to hear more and more and more about, because a lot of men are out there subjected to this kind of behavior and they don't even recognize they're being abused. And this is where I start getting accused of sounding like an MRA. No, this is gender, right? This is the stuff that I think is a part of feminism, because men are so afraid of people thinking they're feminized. I shouldn't say all men, some. Guys, just assume some when I speak in these generalities. There is this social fear of men being seen as emasculated or feminized, and so guys don't do things that may be healthy for them because they're afraid of having their masculinity questioned. And, case in point, I hear while I'm watching the Olympics that some guys won't swim with Katie Ledecky because she's good and she beats them. And I mean, if I were that coach, it's like, you get back in the damn pool because you shouldn't care that that's a girl. She's a good swimmer. Like, it should be that simple. But no, they let these guys not swim with Katie Ledecky because it was too psychologically problematic for them. And I hate that word, so that was snark. And that's why I thought that longitudinal study that said that video games did not have any impact on sexist attitudes, because the way these studies are conducted is that they do these things and they ask people questions. And people, if they're asked a question, is it okay to hit a woman? Show me anybody who's actually going to say yes. Even people who do hit women will say it's wrong in theory, right? There's no point in even asking that question because it's too loaded a statement. These, in general, it's assumed that threats are wrong, and that's why you get into the "you made me do this, you brought this on yourself" element of abuse, because people have to find reasons to excuse that behavior. But something more subtle about this expectation that, men are supposed to protect women. I come up against this a lot, and I have been criticized by other feminists by not accepting the protective offers of men in the video game industry. And I refuse them because they are benevolent, or as I call them, insidiously sexist. And if you're a guy who's done this, don't freak out. I'm not saying you're a bad person. Your intentions were good. The issue is that this is an industry where it's your ideas. It's not a question of increased physicality. And we've already dealt with the whole work thing, that I think that hours for everybody, that, endurance for all employees should come down. It should not be an endurance sport to work a job, because everybody who wants a job should have a job, and it should not be only the people with the best constitutions. You shouldn't need an 18 constitution score on your Dungeons & Dragons character to work in the video game industry. Because anybody knows, we're like wizard class type people. We have like that 18 in intelligence. We might have an 18 wisdom if you want to be a priest, or some of us are bards. That 18 charisma. You only have so many points. And so you can't have 18 strength and 18 dexterity and 18 constitution and intelligence. You got to divvy them up. And the reality is we don't have, except at Ubisoft, those dudes are pretty buff. But everywhere else, and people who aren't buff when they get a job at Ubisoft become more buff as they work at the company. I don't know what they do there, but Ubisoft is like the buffest pack of developers in gaming. But, they're the exception that proves the rule. And most of us are noodly armed cream puffs. And it's because we work with our brains. And that being said, I believe, just based on my own experiences, I had a great set of educators through the public school system who did not go easy on me because I was female. And I am eternally grateful for that. For whatever reason, apparently I was identified quite young, and there was a little note in my file. And I was not given that, more common experience of, just try hard instead of do well, that a lot of women get. I was very lucky. And I did fail sometimes. I didn't, rise to the challenge, but other times I succeeded. And that ability to know I was good at something, to know I could do it, without question, had a very beneficial impact on my self-esteem. that took a real knock when I got when I got into university and the politics kicked in, and I went, what is this bullshit? And then when I got into the working world where the politics were even worse, if you don't have that bank of self-esteem where you're basically given tests and you either get the answer right or you get the answer wrong, you erode into that bank. It's like hit points in terms of self-esteem. And if you don't have that bank, if you aren't tanking by the time you get into your 20s, tanking meaning like you're a tank in the party, not tanking losing energy. But if you don't have that accumulated hit points, you're not going to make it through the early years of your career. And because they're rough, there's all these people nipping at your heels from behind. There's all these people above who are afraid of you because there's only so many jobs to go around, and God, especially older women, in my experience, is just my experience, but a lot of them were affirmative action hires, and so they believe there could only be, a set number of female executives at any level. And that was partially true, but because the company itself was like, well, we have enough women, we don't have to hire another one based on merit. But so they were constantly afraid that if another woman ascended, then they would get booted out. Oh yeah, the other thing about, this whole so-called benevolent, or as I call it, insidious sexism, is that when you defy what your gender is supposed to do, you get kind of snide responses. The women are women who are ambitious, like myself, I get this all the time of, oh, that's great. Or isn't that cute? Or you're treated as an amusement. What a character. Or you get, she's a very divisive personality. She's a very polarizing personality. A guy walks into a room and offers an opinion. He is far less likely to be accused of being a polarizing personality. He's a professional with an opinion. But, guys who want to be parents are seen as weird, or I've been told by men who work in male-dominated fields like childcare that some parents treat them, and other coworkers treat them, as a potential predator. And this is ridiculous. I've met nurturing men. I've met very ambitious women. And are these minority groups in terms of choice of career? Yes. Is it weird? Is it an anomaly in an unhealthy way? No. And you keep hearing that the wage gap is caused by self-selection. But you can't say that the wage gap is caused by self-selection and then wonder why that is when all these, negative feedback loops start forming in society the minute you do choose careers that don't have to do with children and being nice to each other. When women choose results-based careers, we get a lot of negative reinforcement pushing us away. But I'm getting off topic here. I just... Feedback Friday has a tendency to focus on criticism. And I want to temper that with a real acknowledgement of the positives that have come out, because it's super important. You guys deserve a huge amount of credit. I couldn't do this on my own, both from a funding perspective, because I can't give myself money. That's not the way economics work. But also the fact that people were willing to have an open mind and did defy those stereotypes and were open to respectful disagreements at worst and, extreme praise at best. And some of the praise came from groups who started off very distrustful of me. So in that big kumbaya ending, I'm going to wrap this up unless YouTube's algorithm decides to blow something up in a hilarious way again, and get to work on the finale. And thank you again. Hope you guys have a great weekend. As usual, gonna aim for 2, possibly 3. Might go 3 just because, yeah, but I gotta admit, I kind of want to get this finished. For purely selfish reasons, I just want it done so I can say it's done and we have a complete body of work, and then people can watch the whole thing from start to finish at their leisure. But I don't want to ramble too much longer. See you guys on Monday. Happy Friday. Have a fun and safe weekend. I'm going to go to the theater this weekend because Alice in Wonderland's playing somewhere, and I love everything, absolutely anything to do with Alice in Wonderland. So if there is Alice in Wonderland, whether it's a play or a ballet or anything like that, I am there. So that's what I'm doing this weekend. And then I will probably play video games because who am I kidding?